Welcome to Psyche Talks. Today, you're joining us for a deep dive into something truly fundamental, how we think and make decisions. And this exploration is all thanks to you, the listener, actually, for pointing us to the incredibly insightful audiobook of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah, fantastic book. Our goal in this deep dive is really to unpack the core ideas behind our two systems of thought. You know, the quick, intuitive system one,
Right.
and the slower, more deliberate system two. And to really understand how they shape the judgments and choices you make every single day.
We'll see how these systems cooperate and, well, sometimes clash, right?
Exactly. Leading to both brilliant insights and those, let's say, predictable mistakes we all make.
Think of this as your personal backstage pass to the hidden workings of your own mind. A bit of shortcut, maybe.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so this idea of two systems, the book really breaks it down. We've got these two sort of distinct modes of thinking. System one is like that autopilot. Lightning fast, automatic. It's what lets you instantly pick up on, say, annoyance in someone's voice.
Or swerve to avoid something in the road, you know, without even thinking about it.
It just happens effortlessly.
And then we have system two, that's more like your brain's CEO, maybe. It kicks in when you need to focus.
Right, the effortful stuff.
When you're tackling a complex problem, doing a tricky calculation, or really concentrating on something, it's the attention-demanding system.
What really blows my mind, though, is how much of our mental activity just appears.
Yeah.
The book talks about how so many impressions, even beliefs, just bubble up without us consciously knowing where they came from.
Exactly. You can't trace the origins of those simple beliefs or those, you know, gut reactions most of the time.
It's like, why do I just picture a blue elephant? No idea.
Right. And it's crucial to understand this isn't about saying our intuition is always wrong or bad. In fact, Kahneman emphasizes that most of the time, our system one judgments are perfectly appropriate.
Get us through the day.
To get us through the day efficiently, yeah.
But there's a flip side, isn't there? We can feel incredibly confident in these gut feelings.
Oh, and Dad.
Even when we're completely off the mark. Like, someone else might see the error way before we do.
Precisely. And that's where the real power of understanding these systems comes in. It gives you a richer vocabulary, a better language to discuss these errors.
Both in yourself and in others.
Yes. The hope is that by recognizing these patterns, you can become more aware of potential pitfalls and maybe, just maybe, make slightly better decisions down the road.
Okay, so this whole framework, it didn't just pop out of nowhere. The book gets into the origins. It sounds like a really pivotal moment. It was back in, what, 1969? A seminar with Amos Tversky.
That's right. That seminar tackled a really fundamental question. Are humans naturally good, intuitive statisticians?
Like, do we just get probability?
Yeah, do we have a gut feeling for how probabilities work, the same way a kid just sort of intuitively grasps grammar?
And the initial takeaway wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, was it?
Not at all. After a good debate, the answer was, well, a pretty qualified no.
Even their own intuitions.
Exactly. Even their own intuitions about statistics seemed deficient. And these were people who, you know, knew statistics.
Wow.
This led directly to their first study, which was quite revealing. They actually surveyed other expert researchers about their statistical gut feelings.
And what did they find? Were the experts messing up too?
Absolutely. The study showed that even seasoned statisticians tended to overestimate the likelihood of replicating research findings with small sample sizes.
So they thought their results were more solid than they actually were, statistically speaking.
Kind of, yeah. And they also gave surprisingly poor advice to, say, graduate students about how many participants they really needed for their studies.
Huh. So these are the people writing the textbooks, and their own intuition was leading them astray sometimes. That's almost humbling.
It really is. And it sounds like this shared discovery, this realization of our flawed intuitions, was the spark for that amazing partnership between Kahneman and Tversky.
Yeah, the book describes it as a very enjoyable collaboration. Sounds like it took off after that first study was mapped out.
It did. From there, they began to systematically investigate these recurring errors, these patterns, which eventually led to their groundbreaking work on heuristics and biases.
Like heuristics and biases, these are the mental shortcuts System 1 uses, right, for quick judgments.
Exactly, the rules of thumb.
Can you give us a couple of solid examples? How do they work and where do they trip us up?
Sure. A classic example is the Steve the librarian or farmer scenario. You get a description of Steve Shy, withdrawn, tidy, passion for detail.
Okay, it sounds like a librarian stereotype.
Right, and most people immediately jump to that conclusion. Steve's probably a librarian because he fits the stereotype.
Yeah, that feels intuitively right.
But here's the trap. What we often fail to consider is the base rate.
The actual numbers.
The simple statistical fact that there are vastly, vastly more farmers than librarians out there. So even with those personality traits, statistically, Steve is much more likely to be a farmer.
Ah, so we're going with the stereotype, the resemblance, and ignoring the odds.
Precisely. That's the representativeness heuristic. Judging probability by resemblance, by how much something fits a prototype, while ignoring those crucial underlying base rates.
And this isn't just a thought experiment, is it? This happens in real life.
No, all the time. Think about hiring decisions, maybe. We might instinctively favor candidates who just look the part, even if someone else is perhaps better qualified on paper.
Okay, I see the trap there. Relying on the mental image, not the data. What's another common shortcut?
Another really big one is the availability heuristic.
Availability, meaning how easily something comes to mind.
Exactly. We judge how frequent or likely something is based purely on how easily examples pop into our heads. The book uses the example of the letter K.
Okay.
Is K more likely to appear as the first letter in a word or as the third letter?
My gut says first. I can instantly think of kite, king, no, kind. Lots of K words starting with K.
See, it feels much easier to retrieve words starting with K.
But
the reality is, K is actually more likely to appear as the third letter in English words.
no way, really?
Yep, words like ask, make, likely. It's just harder to search our mental dictionary that way. So our reliance on ease of recall, the availability heuristic, leads us to the wrong conclusion about frequency.
So these heuristics, these shortcuts, they're useful sometimes.
Incredibly useful for quick decisions, yes.
But they can also lead to these systematic errors, these biases in our predictions.
That's the core idea.
So system one is all about speed, efficiency. But that comes with this risk of errors, of what the book calls jumping to conclusions. Why is system one so quick to leap?
Well, efficiency is its prime directive, you could say. It operates on a kind of need-to-know basis and prioritizes building a coherent story and narrative from whatever information is readily available.
Which is great when you need to react fast.
Exactly. It's a great strategy when conclusions are likely to be right and the cost of being wrong occasionally is low. Think about reacting to a sudden noise. Better to jump and be wrong than hesitate and miss a real danger. Right.
But that same efficiency becomes a liability in unfamiliar situations, or when the stakes are high.
Precisely. Or when we actually have time to gather more information but don't. System one tends to just gloss over ambiguity.
Suppress doubt.
Yes, suppressed doubt. The book gives that great example of the ambiguous figure.
The one that looks like ABC or 12, 13, 14.
That's the one. Depending on whether it's surrounded by letters or numbers, you instantly see one interpretation.
And you don't even realize the other possibility exists.
Not usually, no. We latch onto one meaning instantly. It's like our brains are just so eager to make sense of things, they fill in the gaps and move right along.
And approach the bank example highlights that too, doesn't it?
Perfectly.
Yeah.
We immediately picture a financial institution, right?
Yeah.
Gonna deposit a check or something.
Yeah, not the side of a river.
Exactly. System one swiftly builds that plausible story without even considering the alternative meaning of bank. The initial understanding feels complete. We don't spontaneously generate other options.
And this simple tendency, jumping to the obvious conclusion, has huge implications, doesn't it? Especially today with so much information flying around.
Absolutely. It helps explain why, emotionally charged but maybe factually thin stories can gain so much traction online. The immediate narrative feels complete, even if crucial context is missing. W.Y.S.I.A.T.I. in action.
Okay, W.Y.S.I.A.T.I. We'll get to that. But first, this eagerness to believe. The book talks about Gilbert's experiment on belief and disbelief. What was that about?
Ah, yes. Gilbert's research suggested something quite fascinating, that System 1 operates on a principle of basically believing things by default. Understanding something is believing it, initially.
So doubt takes effort.
Exactly. It's System 2 that has to actively engage, to doubt, to unbelieve, to critically evaluate information. His experiments showed that when System 2 was busy...
Like doing another task.
Yeah, like remembering a string of digits. Participants were more likely to accept false statements they were presented with as true.
So if System 2 is distracted, System 1's sort of natural gullibility takes over. That's slightly unnerving.
It is a bit, yeah.
And that connects directly to confirmation bias, doesn't it? Our tendency to look for stuff that proves we're right.
Spot on. System 1 has this built-in tendency to seek out confirming evidence and kind of ignore or downplay anything that contradicts its current picture.
It wants a neat story.
It wants a coherent, consistent story, even if that story isn't entirely accurate or complete.
Which brings us to that acronym you mentioned, WYSI-ADDY.
Yes. What you see is all there is.
That sounds incredibly important for understanding System 1's limits.
It's fundamental, really. WYSI-ADDY captures System 1's crucial reliance only on the information that is immediately available right there in front of it.
It doesn't consider what's missing.
Exactly. It doesn't factor in the unknown unknowns or even the known unknowns sometimes, and this has huge consequences.
Like what?
Well, it leads to biases like overconfidence, because the story we construct from the available fragments feels complete and coherent.
Even if it's
Yeah.
based on flimsy evidence.
Right. It also explains framing effects, how the way information is presented can dramatically change our perception and decisions, even if the underlying facts are the same.
And the neglect of base rates we talked about with Steve.
Yes, because those statistical realities often aren't part of the immediate picture System 1 is looking at. The thrifty drugstore example in the book really drives WYSI home.
Oh, refresh my memory on that one.
Okay, so participants read about a legal case, an incident at a drugstore involving a union representative. Some people only got the union organizer's side of the story.
Okay.
Others only got the store's perspective. And a third group heard both sides.
And the results.
The striking finding was that those who only heard one side weren't just more likely to favor that side, which you might expect,
Yeah.
but they were also significantly more confident in their judgment, even though they knew perfectly well they were only getting a partial view.
Wow. So seeing less made them more sure.
Exactly. That's WYSID. The coherent narrative built from the limited information breeds this powerful sense of confidence, regardless of how much is actually being left out.
It really makes you wonder, how do we ever recognize when we don't have enough information?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It seems our brains just prefer that simple, complete feeling story. Okay, so if judgments are based on this often incomplete picture, how do they actually happen? The book mentions a mental shotgun. What's that?
Hey, the mental shotgun is a great metaphor. It describes how System 1 automatically performs a whole range of basic assessments, computes more than you asked for, even when you're not explicitly trying to.
Like what kind of assessments?
Think about just seeing someone's face. You might instantly register things like attractiveness, maybe trustworthiness, a sense of competence or dominance,
Without even meaning to.
without any conscious effort at all. These assessments just happen in the background, like a shotgun blast, scattering pellets in multiple directions.
So these initial impressions are constantly firing off.
Pretty much. And this leads to something called intensity matching.
Intensity matching.
Yeah, it's our tendency to sort of map one scale of intensity onto another intuitively. The book gives examples like linking loudness to brightness
Or the severity of a punishment to the severity of a crime.
Exactly. It's this automatic sense of proportional response, finding a match across different dimensions.
And this automatic mapping, this shotgun effect, can lead us to substitution.
Yes. Substitution is key. This is where, when faced with a difficult, complex question, System 1 often unconsciously replaces it with an easier related question and answers that instead.
And we don't even realize we've made the switch.
Often not, no. The Ford stock example illustrates this perfectly.
Hey, blind me.
Someone asked whether they should invest in Ford stock. That's a complex financial question, right?
Right, requires analysis.
But instead of doing that analysis, they might unconsciously substitute the much easier question, do I like Ford cars?
And if they like the cars.
They might feel positive about the stock and decide to invest based entirely on that feeling without ever truly grappling with the actual investment prospects.
That's slightly terrifying for decision making.
It highlights these incredibly efficient but sometimes deeply flawed mechanisms our minds use constantly.
Okay, the book also talks about cognitive ease and strain. How do those feelings guide our thinking?
Right, so cognitive ease is that feeling your brain gets when things are going smoothly. Information feels familiar, it's easy to process, there are no threats. It basically signals, okay, System 1 can handle this, no need to call in the big guns.
And cognitive strain.
Strain is the opposite. It kicks in when something is unfamiliar, complex, maybe confusing, or requires focused attention. It's a signal that says, whoa, hang on, we need System 2 to get involved here.
And this subjective feeling, this ease or strain, It can actually sway our judgment about truth.
It absolutely can. Things that are easier for our brains to process text in a clear font, for instance.
Uh,
Or statements that rhyme, or ideas we've heard repeated multiple times. These things are more likely to be judged as true.
just because they feel easier.
Pretty much. It's called the illusory truth effect. The rhyming aphorisms experiment is a great example.
What happened there?
Participants rated rhyming proverbs like woes unite foes as more insightful and true than non-rhyming versions with the same meaning, like woes unite enemies.
Just because of the rhyme.
The rhyme creates cognitive ease, fluency, and our brains seem to mistakenly equate that ease with truthfulness or insight.
Fascinating. These subtle cues have such power. And what about our mood? How does being happy or sad affect which system is in charge?
Mood plays a big role. A good mood, generally speaking, tends to loosen System two's control.
So we get more intuitive.
Yeah, more intuitive, often more creative, but also more prone to errors, more reliant on System 1 shortcuts.
And a bad mood.
A bad mood tends to make us more vigilant, more analytical, more suspicious. System 2 gets more involved, but we might lose some of that intuitive creativity.
So our emotional state is constantly kind of nudging the controls between System 1 and System 2.
Seems that way, yes.
Okay, the book then shifts into norms, surprises, and how we perceive cause and effect.
Yeah.
How does System 1 handle our basic expectations about the world?
System 1 is constantly building and maintaining this complex model of what's normal in our environment. It's based on associations, patterns, things that usually happen together.
So it knows what to expect.
In a way, yes. And because of this model, it's highly sensitive to anything that deviates from that norm to surprises. The feeling of surprise is actually a key signal that our understanding of the world might need an update.
And these expectations, they can be active, like things we're consciously waiting for.
Right, like expecting the phone to ring when you ordered pizza.
And also passive, those background assumptions we don't even think about.
Exactly, like passively expecting the floor to support you when you walk. You don't consciously think about it until, well, maybe it doesn't. A surprise happens when either type of expectation isn't met.
The book tells that story about the psychologist, John, appearing in unlikely places.
Oh yeah, that perfectly illustrates how a surprise can reshape our sense of normality. They bumped into him somewhere highly improbable, which was a huge surprise.
Oh.
Then later they saw him again in another highly unlikely but different location. Still improbable, but it felt less surprising the second time.
Because the first encounter had already stretched their model of where John might plausibly appear.
Precisely. Our brains are constantly recalibrating that internal normal meter. And System 1 is also a relentless cause seeker.
Ah, yes. We seem hardwired to find explanations, even for randomness.
We really are. The wincing soup eater example from norm theory shows this. You see someone taste soup and wince, that's unusual, maybe surprising.
Right.
Then if you see them add salt later, that action seems more normal or expected because it fits into a causal story you've instantly constructed. Ah, the soup wasn't seasoned well, that's why they winced.
Even if the wince was for a totally different reason?
Exactly. We impose causality. And then there are things like the Moses illusion.
Oh, the riddle. How many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark?
That's the one. And so many people answered 2, completely breezing past the fact that it was Noah, not Moses.
Why do we miss that?
Because System 1 focuses on the general gist, leader, animals, ark, pairs. It fits a familiar biblical narrative schema. We don't always engage System 2 to check the specific details, especially if the overall sense feels right.
It's also interconnected, which leads us nicely into anchoring. This sounds like another really powerful, often unconscious influence.
Anchoring is huge. It happens when we're asked to consider a particular value, the anchor for some unknown quantity before we estimate that quantity.
And that first number sticks.
It sticks and biases our final estimate towards it, even if that anchor is completely arbitrary or irrelevant. The Wheel of Fortune experiment is the classic demonstration.
Right, where students spun a wheel that landed on a random number like 10 or 65.
Totally random, yes.
Right. And then they were asked to estimate something unrelated, like the percentage of African nations in the UN.
And their estimates were significantly different depending on whether they'd just seen the 10 or the 65 on the wheel. People anchored on that meaningless number.
That's wild. And it happens all the time in real life.
Constantly. Think about asking prices in negotiations, suggested donation amounts, even damage claims in lawsuits. The first number thrown out often acts as a powerful anchor.
And System 2 can't just override it easily.
It seems to have limited control. System 2 tries to adjust away from the anchor, but the adjustment is often insufficient because it operates on information that's already been activated, brought to mind, by System 1 contemplating that anchor.
So the anchor primes certain thoughts.
Exactly. And anchoring is closely related to priming effects in general, those subtle, unconscious influences on our thoughts and behaviors.
Like that honesty box experiment. That one was really striking.
Oh, the one at the British University with the posters over the coffee station? Yeah.
Remind us what happened.
Basically, they had an honesty box for people to pay for coffee or tea. For several weeks, they alternated posters above it. Some weeks, it was a poster of flowers. Other weeks,
Pictures of eyes.
yes, just a pair of eyes looking out from the poster. And the results were dramatic. People contributed significantly more money, almost 3 times as much during the weeks when the eye posters were up.
Just because they felt subconsciously watched.
It seems so. It happened completely outside of conscious awareness for the participants, highlighting just how much our behavior can be nudged by these environmental cues we don't even register.
Wow. Okay, so all these heuristics, biases, anchoring, priming, they can contribute to something bigger called an availability cascade.
Yes, an availability cascade is a kind of self-sustaining chain reaction.
How does it work?
It often starts with a relatively minor event or maybe a low probability risk, but it gets picked up by the media, maybe amplified.
People start talking about it.
Exact. The public reaction grows. As you hear more about it, examples become more easily available in your mind. There's the availability heuristic again.
So it starts to feel more important, more frequent than it actually is.
Precisely. This increases public concern, which leads to more media coverage, maybe political action, and the cycle reinforces itself. The perceived importance snowballs, often becoming disconnected from the actual underlying risk or significance.
Okay, let's try and unpack what this all means for you, the learner. Stepping back from all these details, by understanding these two systems, System 1 and System 2, and the biases they can create, you're now, hopefully, a bit better equipped to navigate the daily flood of information, right?
Yeah.
To make more informed decisions.
That's the goal, whether you're prepping for a big meeting, evaluating news sources, or just satisfying your curiosity about why you think the way you do.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Starting to recognize these mental shortcuts, these heuristics, these potential traps in your own thinking.
And in others' thinking too, absolutely. It's not about aiming for perfection. That's probably impossible and maybe not even desirable. System 1 is incredibly useful.
But it's about awareness.
It's about being aware of where you might be susceptible to these intuitive errors, these biases, knowing the patterns.
So what does this all boil down to? I guess it means you now have a deeper appreciation for just how complex human judgment really is.
Definitely. We hope this deep dive into thinking fast and slow has sparked some aha moments for you.
Yeah, and maybe provided a framework, a language for thinking about your own thinking. So for a final provocative thought to leave you with, think back to the last, maybe important decision you made. Could be big or small.
Okay.
Looking back now, through this lens of System 1 and System 2, can you spot any heuristics or biases that might have been nudging your thoughts? Was WYSIAD at play? Was there an anchor?
And maybe think about what, if anything, you might approach differently next time you face a similar kind of choice now that you have this framework.
Something to chew on.
Thanks to listen to Psyche Talks.